Hey, look, it's a high school reunion. Just gained the most weight, got the worst job, and still doesn't get it.
What's that supposed to mean?
When you think of 90s alternative rock, you probably think of Seattle and grunge and maybe Flannel too. Your mind immediately floods with images of angst-ridden frontman, distortion-drenched guitars, and a generation finding its voice in the rain-soaked Pacific Northwest. But while the mainstream was laser-focused on that one scene, a trio of musical outlaws from Dallas, Texas, was quietly building one of the most fanatical followings in the entire country. They didn't have a massive radio hit, they weren't on the cover of every magazine, but Reverend Horton Heat, with their high-octane blend of punk, country, and rockabilly, were the secret kings of the underground. Because you guys requested it, let's talk about how they dominated the decade. The late 80s music scene was, well, strange. Hair metal was still clinging to its aerosol and spandex throne, pop was polished to a synthetic sheen, and pure dangerous rock and roll felt like a distant memory. The world was crying out for something that was authentic and something raw and real. Enter James C. Heath. Born in Corpus Christi, Texas, Heath was raised on pretty much everything but corporate rock. His parents loved big band and musicals, while his cousins introduced him to the raw power of Johnny Cash. He cut his teeth playing in local bands, mostly gravitating towards 50s music, blues, show music, and he also cited the 70s era movie American Graffiti as having a big influence on his musical tastes. There were a series of interviews that Heath gave, and there was one notable interview with the North County Times where it stated he spent his formative years in an East Texas correctional facility until the age of 17. After that stint, he started hustling with a pool cue before he turned to guitar. Now, Heath did clarify later on that some of the stuff written about his bio when he was doing press in the band's early days was not true and made up by an overzealous publicist. In the early part of his musical career, Heath envisioned being a solo artist, but that proved to be too difficult to get off the ground. At the time, Heath was living above a Dallas nightclub, with him telling the LA Times, "The rats were so fat they couldn't even walk right, and the roaches were so huge I had pet names for them, and they hung out in their own little area of my place. It was real disgusting." Wanting to make enough money to move into a new place, Heath needed a new plan. That happened in 1986. While playing gigs in a band in Dallas' now famous Deep Ellum neighborhood, a club owner named Russell Hobbs bestowed upon him his famous moniker. Heath told the Georgia Straight, "Then he gave me a solo gig, and when I showed up to play, he said, 'You should be Reverend Horton Heat.' And I thought it was really corny. I was going, no way, but he'd already put up flyers everywhere. So I got up there and started playing, and I guess I did pretty good. The people were calling me Reverend and everything." Heath added in a separate interview to the Burlington Free Press that early on in his career, he did used to do some tongue-in-cheek gospel songs. So the name kind of fit. With a name and gigs in tow, he soon bought himself the cheapest powder blue polyester suit he could find. It was more than just a stage name. It was a whole new identity. It brought to mind the fire and brimstone passion of a Southern preacher, but the gospel he was about to spread was one of greasy, high-speed rock and roll, and those early gigs saw Heath actually do, as he put it, insanely stupid sermons. The problem was the world wasn't quite ready for what he was selling. Heath knew that he needed a rhythm section that could not only keep up but also add to the chaos. In 1989, his disciples Jimbo Wallace, a madman on the upright bass who played with a percussive slapping technique that was as much as a weapon as an instrument, and Patrick Taz Bentley on drums, who laid down a relentless driving beat. While Heath still used the moniker Reverend Horton Heat, it was also used to describe his new band, which was a trio. They weren't just a band, though. They were a force of nature, an answer to the sanitized state of mainstream music. They were the real deal in a world of fakes. By 1989, Reverend Horton Heat were playing rockabilly music, but that soon changed. Taz Bentley told the record newspaper, "We were just going around Texas playing blues, country, whatever was popular there. But we wanted something different. We wanted to play punk clubs to build up a bigger and more varied fan base. That was the route we wanted to take." In the early 90s, the center of the alternative music universe was Sub Pop Records in Seattle. The label was ground zero for grunge, unleashing bands like Nirvana and Soundgarden on an unsuspecting world. So when it was time for Reverend Horton Heat to record their debut album, signing with Sub Pop felt like a deliciously ironic move. Here was a band that was the sonic opposite of the flannel-clad angst, a trio of Texans playing supercharged punk-infused rockabilly, joining the roster of the definitive grunge label. What garnered Sub Pop's interest was the band's live shows, especially at punk clubs. Heath admitted to the Ann Arbor News, "Sub Pop is the perfect label for us. Sub Pop to me is almost like Sun Records, 2 guys and some employees. They record their bands really rough and dry." By 1990, the band dropped their debut album, Smoke 'Em If You Got 'Em. The title itself was a throwback to a World War II era phrase that basically meant go for it if you've got the goods. And man, did they have the goods. After an initial attempt at a traditional studio recording, the band and the label made a crucial call. They scrapped it and re-recorded the album live in the studio straight to a 2-track. This wasn't about getting the perfect take. It was about capturing lightning in a bottle. The result was an album that sounded exactly like the band did on stage, raw, explosive, and unapologetically alive. The album was the world's first real taste of their signature sound, a style that would later be called Psychobilly. So what is Psychobilly? Imagine taking the swagger and the twang of the 1950s rockabilly, injecting it with the speed and aggression of punk, and adding lyrical themes straight out of a late-night B-movie. It's music for driving too fast, for making questionable decisions, and for celebrating the glorious trashy side of life. In a 2015 interview, Heath explained, "I say we're a rock and roll band that is especially influenced by 50s style music, especially rockabilly. That kind of gets the fact in there that maybe we'll have a little surf guitar in there, or maybe country, or a little blues, or maybe even punk rock." And then there was the song that became their calling card, Psychobilly Freakout. It was a blistering 2.5-minute blast of frantic guitar, slap bass mayhem, and wild yelps and howls from the Reverend himself. Heath later noted that when he wrote the song, the term psychobilly was virtually unknown in America, leading many to credit him with pioneering the genre stateside. While critics at the time were a little confused, with the Trouser Press calling the album fresh but mild and Rolling Stone deeming it entirely derivative, but it also got plenty of verve and a touch of wit. The record made an undeniable impact. It announced the arrival of a band that was proudly out of step with the times, preaching a new gospel of loud, fast, and fun. As one paper put it, "We like horses, we like beer and red meat, and we love high heels." With their mission statement out in the world, Reverend Horton Heat did what all great underground bands do. They hit the road. And they basically never stopped. Throughout the early 90s, the band's reputation was built not in the studio, but in the beer-soaked clubs and bars across America. They were true road warriors, playing over 200 dates a year and sometimes as many as 275 shows a year. The relentless touring schedule was the engine of their success. It's how they built their fanatical cult following, one person, one town, one explosive night at a time. The live show was and still is the ultimate Reverend Horton Heat experience. It was a spectacle of pure manic energy and serious musical skill. Jim Heath, front and center with his signature Gretsch guitar, wasn't just playing songs, he was conducting a rock and roll exorcism. To his side, Jimbo Wallace was a show all by himself, manhandling his giant upright bass, slapping it, spinning it, and sometimes even climbing right on top of it, while Heath shredded a solo. It was powerful, inventive, and just plain fun. In 1993, they went back to the studio, this time with a producer who actually understood their chaotic energy, Gibby Haynes of the Butthole Surfers. The result was the full custom gospel sounds of the Reverend Horton Heat. The album was a huge step forward, faster, tighter, and more confident than their debut. It unleashed future fan favorites like the frantic ode to rural smuggling, bales of cocaine, and the suggestive guitar-driven wiggle stick.
Falling from no flying planes. I don't know who done dropped them, but I think I'm just saying.
These songs were masterclasses in the Reverend's lyrical style, smart, funny, and just a little bit dangerous, celebrating cars, girls, and all kinds of misadventures. The combination of this killer second album and their legendary live shows created a perfect storm. Word of mouth spread like wildfire, mainstream radio might not have known what to do with them, and MTV was, of course, too busy with Seattle, but in the dive bars and rock clubs of America, a movement was brewing. They were attracting a diverse congregation of punks, greasers, cowboys, and anyone who felt left out by the self-seriousness of the alternative mainstream. The crowd these guys drew was pretty varied, with the Reverend revealing, "We don't just draw one type of crowd. We get old gray-haired folks standing next to dreadlocked headbanger types. People interact with people they wouldn't normally hang out with." The question was, how could a band this wild and authentic get to the next level without losing the very soul that made them so special? It was time to make a deal with a major label. By 1994, Reverend Horton Heat had built a kingdom in the underground. They were kings of the road with a rabid following that sold out clubs wherever they went. But they hit the indie label ceiling. That's where major labels, always hunting for the next big thing, came knocking, and they were soon the subject of a major bidding war. In a move that let them step up into the big leagues without abandoning their roots, the band signed a joint deal with Sub Pop and major player Interscope Records. The first record under this new deal was 1994's Liquor in the Front, an album with a title as cheeky and as irreverent as the music itself. At the time, Heath teased that the album would be more Latin influenced, stating, "All my first bands had Chicano, Mexican, American people in it. It's finally coming into our music and it's neat." To produce it, they tapped another figure from the darker, heavier side of alternative music, Al Jorgensen of Ministry fame. It was a partnership born out of mutual respect and a shared love for chaos. The story goes that Jorgensen was so impressed after seeing the band live in Chicago, he got down on his knees and licked the members' shoes. Jorgensen's influence was pretty obvious. He took the Reverend's already powerful sound and cranked it straight into the red. Liquor in the Front is the heaviest, most aggressive album in the band's 90s catalog, thanks to Jorgensen's production, which gave Heath's guitar a massive roaring tone that finally matched the intensity he'd always wanted. The album explodes out of the gate with the 1-2 punch of Big Sky and Baddest of the Bad, two songs that flow together so perfectly they feel like one epic statement. This album was their bridge to a wider audience. The single One Time For Me even cracked the Billboard Modern Rock Tracks chart, peaking at number 40, and the album itself hit number 18 on the Heat Seekers chart. But the collaboration with Jorgensen wasn't exactly smooth sailing. The recording sessions were reportedly wild, with Jorgensen's methods pushing the band into territory that was at times out of their control. According to the Houston Press, some members felt the final product was almost too slick, and they had to bring in another engineer to dirty up some of the tracks. This was the classic struggle of an underground band stepping into the big leagues. How to maintain your raw, authentic edge while working in a major label system. The band went as far as actually preventing record label people from sitting in on the sessions. So the band doubled down on what made them great. They embraced the bigger, louder sound, but never sacrificed their core identity. They were still writing songs about fast cars like 5 Ford and hard living, liquor, beer, and wine. And Liquor in the Front was the sound of a band kicking down the door to the mainstream, not politely asking to be let in. It was a modest commercial success and an artistic triumph that proved that they could play in the big leagues without selling their soul. By 1995, the band was part of what was being dubbed a rockabilly revival in the States. They were touring with a good variety of groups, including White Zombie, Toady, Soundgarden, Ministry, and even Iggy Pop. Riding the wave from Liquor in the Front, Reverend Horton Heat entered the most visible period of their career. This phase also brought a big change. Drummer Taz Bentley left, and Scott Chirilla stepped in to take his place. The new lineup would record the album that took the band to its commercial peak, 1996, It's Martini Time. On the album, the band leaned into a slightly more polished swing-influenced sound, but without losing their signature energy. The album was a success, becoming their first record to crack the main Billboard 200 chart, reaching number 165. The title track became a minor hit, a suave, catchy anthem that perfectly captured the band's cool, retro style. The album was also notable for the track Cowboy Love, a story about an interracial gay romance, including cowboys. One interview, Heath claimed it was inspired by an accidental trip to a gay cowboy bar. As he told the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, "This was just a silly song I had. I asked a couple of my black friends about the song. They told me that if anybody doesn't get it, it's their own damn fault. It's so funny. My gay friends told me the same thing. They thought it was hilarious." Heath also added that the song made fun of his terrible white trash The world was finally catching up. Suddenly, the secret kings of the underground were everywhere. Jim Heath made a guest appearance on the acclaimed TV drama Homicide, Life on the Street, and the band even performed on the Drew Carey Show in 1997.
You still stuck working down at the bottling plant?
Yeah, we're stuck making $20 an hour.
Whoa, can you put in a good word for me?
Depends on where you want me to put it.
They weren't just a cult phenomenon anymore, they were part of a larger cultural conversation. They followed it up with 1998's Space Heater, an album that continued to explore their mix of psychobilly, surf, and swing. But the band dipped a bit more into some of their influences. Wallace told the Oakland Tribune, "We're all fans of AC/DC, Motorhead, and the Ramones, and we dipped into that stuff in here." The album was recorded in just 16 days. It's pretty amazing considering the band entered the studio with no songs. But the musical landscape was starting to shift again. The alternative rock boom of the early 90s was fading, and major labels were changing their priorities. The very system that had lifted the band to new heights was becoming unstable. After Space Heater, the band's relationship with Interscope ended during the kind of corporate shakeup that was becoming all too common in the industry. In a fitting full-circle moment, Sub Pop released the compilation Holy Roller in 1999, a collection that served as a perfect summary of their wild ride through the decade. While some might argue that the band's output in the late 90s didn't quite hit the raw heights of their earlier works, this period was crucial. It proved that Reverend Horton Heat could achieve mainstream success on their own terms. They brought their uncompromising sound to national television and the Billboard charts without ever changing who they were. They navigated the treacherous waters of a major label deal and came out on the other side with their integrity intact, ready to continue their mission into the new millennium. So how do you measure the success of a band like Reverend Horton Heat? If you're just looking at the chart positions or platinum albums, you're missing the entire point. Their legacy isn't etched in precious metals. It's tattooed on the skin of their fans. It's echoed in the sound of countless bands they inspired, and it's cemented by their reputation as one of the hardest working, most electrifying live acts of all time. The real innovation was taking the sound and attitude of rockabilly and psychobilly and updating it for the alternative rock generation. Before them, rockabilly was often treated like a museum piece, a revivalist genre happy to just recreate the past. The Reverend and his crew injected it with the speed of punk and the power of modern distorted guitars. They created a blueprint that would be followed by a wave of psychobilly and rockabilly bands like Tiger Army and the Coffin Cats. Their influence goes beyond just the music. They were champions of authenticity in an era of manufactured hype. While the music industry was chasing trends, Reverend Horton Heat was building a community through constant, relentless touring. They connected with the audience directly, night after night, earning their loyalty the old-fashioned way. They represented a total disdain for mainstream commercialism, proving that a band could forge its own path and build a lasting career without selling out. Their songs have become part of the pop culture fabric, showing up in everything from shows like Beavis and Butthead to video games like Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3. They shared stages with legends across the musical map, from Motorhead to Johnny Cash, proving they could connect with anyone who loves raw, honest, high-energy music. That brings us to the end of today's video, guys. Let me know in the comments which Reverend Horton Heat song is your favorite and which underground legend we should cover next.